That's our focus, is like to make semantic models build themselves. You have to have the skills where you know enough about the data in your lakehouse.
Yeah.
You know enough about the business, like how do you define customer churn to be able to define that semantic model? Businesses are complicated. The semantic modeling language has to be complete enough to be able to define those semantics.
All right, folks. So today we are with Dave, and Dave is the CTO of AtScale. Thanks, Dave.
Hi,
Um,
Quentin. Thanks for having me.
yeah, no, you're welcome. So I think it's your second time here with us. You had a
hmm
call with Youssef talking about AtScale and what you guys are doing. And today we want to focus a bit more on the new project that you have. But maybe before we go there, yeah, can you give us an update for those who don't know AtScale and what you folks are doing?
Yeah, so at Scale, we sell a universal semantic layer. So semantic layers have been around for a long time, but they've always been tightly coupled with the BI tool. So, you create a semantic layer for that BI tool. Well, there's a lot of different ways of consuming analytics today, including, not in just BI tools, but in applications and data science, and now in Gen AI, with tools like Genie, where you're doing text to SQL. And what a semantic layer does is it's a business friendly representation of the tables in your lakehouse. So things like revenue, gross margin, product, customer, sort of those concepts are what's exposed to the consumer, and so the consumer can deal with very business friendly terms. And then the at scale semantic layer turns that into Databricks SQL, and then does all the nastiness of finding the right tables, doing the right calculations, doing the right joins, so that so you always get the same correct data every time without having to be a database programmer. So that's what a semantic layer is.
But
And last time, Quentin, we announced the community edition of AtScale, so anybody can use AtScale for
nice.
free. And we're now announcing, or just released, our semantic modeling language, or SML, is now open source. So we took our YAML for defining a semantic model that makes all this work, and we put it in the public domain so that we can establish a standard for describing semantics for businesses.
Nice. No, that's great. So wait, so let's say you have, for example, let's say customer churn,
hmm
and then you have the tables where you could find the churn information. So the semantic layer is gonna kind of translate the churn and say, okay, if you want to compute churn, that's where you have to find information. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so the semantic model would be where you would define churn as a calculation. And that calculation may be made up of uh, data fields from multiple different
Mhm.
tables. And those tables have obviously relationships with each other. But when somebody asks for churn, they're not just asking for gross churn, right? They want to see, well, what's my churn by this customer in this type of customer in this region over this time period compared to last year. And so in by gender, by demographic, by income level. All those things are different dimensions. And so if you think about it, that churn calculation needs to be calculated across all that dimensionality so that people can basically slice and dice and ask a question about churn in almost unlimited sort of possibilities in terms of unlimited ways.
Okay, that makes sense. And what? So you mentioned you have a new open source project to get the semantic layer properly. What? So I feel a bit ashamed, but I don't know the ecosystem really well. Like what's out there currently? Do we like what are people using outside of AtScale? I mean, do we have any major other open source project, or is it like brand new and nobody has that?
So when it comes to semantic layers, so we were the first to start it. So I founded the company
Yeah.
11 years ago, and this whole idea of a universal semantic layer was novel. Again, because semantic layers have always been embedded in BI tools, or they've been embedded in databases. And so we're the first to say, let's keep it separate. Well, 11 years later, so there's now other companies like Power BI has their semantic layer in Power BI. Google has their semantic layer in Looker.
Yeah.
And then there's DBT announced their semantic layer about a few years ago. So there's now several sort of different options for semantic layer platforms, including AtScale. And so what we want to do is we wanted to is to allow all these different semantic layer platforms to interoperate. And we also wanted to provide the ability of taking those embedded semantic layers, like in business objects and MicroStrategy and Cognos, and be able to translate them into this modern view of a universal semantic layer. So so Quentin, it just there was no standard for semantic modeling languages, and so what we've done since we've been around for 11 years, we sort of have a superset of all the functionality out there of all these different platforms. So we decided that we're gonna make this happen, and we'll introduce a spec for how you define a semantic model that will incorporate basically everything that you might want to do. And then we'll create a community and a working group, which is what we're working on now, to get all these vendors to work together so that they can support that standard.
Yeah, that looks super exciting. Like you should definitely try to work with the Unity catalog community. See if you can
Hmm.
somehow plug that within Unity catalog so that it becomes the like even more of a standard. That would be amazing. So so
Yeah, let's talk about that, Quentin, because that's
yeah.
a good point. So, at your last conference, you announced Unity Catalog metrics. So
Mhm.
even at Databricks, and then Snowflake has a similar thing that they're doing with core text analysts. They have a semantic file definition. And so now it's clear that to make Gen AI work, you need to sort of cross that boundary from the general internet to a company's own terminology and definitions.
Yeah.
Because an LLM is trained on the general internet, right? It doesn't know what Home Depot's
Yeah.
definition of gross margin means. That's particular to that company's data. So the semantic layer bridges that gap. So that's really that's really important, is to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Especially now with all the LLMs, I feel like it's getting really key. Like it used to be, I feel like semantic layers used to be something everybody would talk maybe 5 years ago, but nobody would
Hmm.
really take it seriously in some
Hmm.
way. But now with the LLM, because we see it's gonna power really the like how the LLM is gonna answer and understand the data, like it's getting more and more important. Um,
Yeah,
so
and so you have to. And here's the thing, right? It's like to build a semantic layer is really hard. It's hard because the semantic modeling language needs to be expressive enough to basically encode all um, the details of the business. And businesses are complicated. So we're talking about churn, customer churn, and gross margin. Those aren't trivial calculations for any kind of enterprise company. So the thing is like the semantic modeling language has to be complete enough to be able to define those semantics. And more importantly, it's not just the metadata of that, it's also how you get the answer. So, what a lot of people don't understand, Quentin, which I want to really make a point of, is that the semantic modeling language is there so that you can define a semantic model for your business. But you've got to couple it with a semantic engine that will go and produce the right
yeah,
SQL based on that model, because we know that if there's that most questions are more than five tables are needed to answer that question, and we know that an LLM trying to guess what those relationships are without a semantic model to guide them
yeah,
is
it's not.
nearly impossible to get the right answer, and to get the right answer every time. Because if a business user asks a question and says, "What's my gross margin or what's my customer churn, over this period compared to last year?" and they answer the second time and it's a different answer,
Yeah, for sure. You want
that's
consistency.
it.
So
And that's
yeah.
like they'll never use that interface again.
Yeah, like if your dashboard changes every quarter just because the query changed, it would be like whoa, whoa, whoa.
It'd be like, what the heck's going on, right?
So, so how does one company create the semantic layers? Because it seems like you have a mix of really business level information, which is hard to get when you are, like data engineer. But at the same time, you need to be, knowledgeable about the tables and all the transformation and the SQL queries. So what's the strategy here? How do you build one? Like, do you ask business user to write down what they need? How do you do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question because you're asking about, okay, who builds that semantic model? Because you have to have the skills where you know enough about the data in your lakehouse.
Yeah.
You know enough about the business, like how do you define customer churn to be able to define that semantic model? So typically, that persona looks like the person who's building the dashboards in a
Mm,
Power BI or a Tableau. And when you think about it, when they're talking, those people understand that they're tied directly into the data platform and they're modeling in that particular workbook or in that particular dashboard. They're building the model so that they can have that calculation and put it in some kind of report or calculation. So that same persona, we're just asking them, don't do it in the BI tool. Do it in the semantic layer platform. Do it once and then use it across everything. So Power BI, Tableau, Excel, ThoughtSpot, Looker, whatever, your Jupyter notebook, your application where you embedded those calculations into those applications with your own visualization or your own sort of workflow, it's always going to be the same. And so you build the semantic model once and you use many.
Man, I really wish you managed to find a way to make it like a standard that everybody use and you put that into UC so that you just create all the information once and then boom, you have it everywhere. Like,
So we're working with it. So stay tuned, Quentin. So we're working with your team
oh, that's amazing.
to have the at scale semantic modeling language (SML) have that be a native part of UC metrics.
Man, I'm
So
sold.
stay tuned there. We're gonna be doing a really interesting integration so that anybody who has built an SML model can couple that with UC metrics and a lakehouse, and you get all that goodness for free.
Yeah, wow. All right. So let's go maybe into a little bit more details. Can you like what do you have in the YAML exactly? Do you define the tables and then SQL queries and just words describing the outputs? How does it work?
Yeah, would you let me share
Yeah,
something and I
yeah,
could
let's do that.
maybe take you through it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and share screen and start here with the open source repository. So what you're seeing here is Semantic Data Layer is the organization, and SML or Semantic Modeling Language is the repository. So what you see here is you can see a definition of what SML is, and then in the repository we basically have the language specification. We also include pre-built semantic models. So you can just plug and play and go to town. We also have helper classes that we're adding soon so that it will help you do serialize and deserialize SML. And then this is really interesting. We're publishing semantic translators. So this is what I was talking about before, Quentin, where you can go from a legacy embedded semantic model that's in Cognos or business objects or MicroStrategy, for example, or even Looker, and then turn it into SML so you can make it a generic semantic model to be used across different tooling.
Oh, wow. So
So
it
what
means that
is
so
yes?
if you have the semantic layer on Power BI, then you would be able to kind of dump it with the translator and save it here.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. Precisely right. And then what it will do is it will take that, in that case, Power BI. So Power BI is one of our first translators that we'll be adding to the repository. We actually have it in trial now. And what it'll do is it will create, for example, this is an example of an SML model. So this is called internet sales. You can see the object type is a model. You can see a label, and then you can see that there's relationships that are set between a fact table called fact internet sales and a date dimension. And then the date dimension has a role play called, so it's an order date dimension. And then you have some other just straight dimensions, and then here's a couple metrics. So that's the ultimate and very, very simple model. And then what you'll see here is you'll see the object hierarchy. So there's lots of documentation if you want to learn about just what goes into building a semantic model. So there's the sort of the ER diagram. And then we have for each object type, so these are the key objects, like a dimension is a key semantic SML object. And so here's an example of what a dimension object would look like. You can see this is the store dimension definition. You can see we have levels and hierarchies defined. And then you can see the ER diagram of what a dimension looks like. A dimension is probably the most complex SML object because a dimension has all kinds of things like relationships. It has attributes. Those attributes can be primary or secondary. It has hierarchies. Hierarchies have levels. And as hierarchies can also have, you can also tie metrical attributes to a hierarchy. So you can see it's, and then here's the definition of all the different properties that you see in those in that particular object. Also, what you see here is you see our model library. So we have some very common models, including AdventureWorks. So this is the standard SSAS, SQL Server
Yeah.
Analysis Services model, in addition to TPC-DS and TPC-H. So in Databricks, right, you ship with a TPC-H data. So you can just go ahead and pull up the TPCH model. This is what it looks like visually. And here it is in the repository. Here's all the model objects, including all the metrics and the metrics definitions. And it's all here ready to plug and play. So how do you see these? How do you use this? Well, you can go ahead and load up and get a free version of the AtScale semantic layer platform that is obviously SML compatible by going to atscale.com, clicking on community, and you can download the developer edition for free. And what you'll get is you'll get what we call Design Center. You'll get an IDE like you see here. Here's a particular model I'm looking at visually. And that model also, I could see the code behind that model. So you can work either in code or you can work with drag and drop visually to create and look at these semantic models. And all you have to do is just add in the repository reference that you see right here in the open source reference. So I just add that in, and I instantly get a particular model. So so it's really easy. For example, to get my AdventureWorks model that you see here. This is what it would look like once you load it into AtScale Design Center. So there's the model. So that's everything in AdventureWorks that is basically the base model for for SSAS. That's the training model. So this is what the user sees over here. Here's the different metrics in different folders. Here's the dimensions. Like here's my different date dimensions. There's my different, here's my customer data with all the demographics. So everything is done and ready to go.
So I don't know, maybe let's say in 1 or 2 years, once we will have all the LLMs being, super, super smart, like how do you see the future? Like you just have data analyst going here and just adding facts and information on the model. and then you load everything to the actual engine, which is going to understand the semantic layer, and then you just answer the question. So you don't even have to write any SQL, not even, I guess, have to build any dashboard anymore. Well, I guess we'll still have, but
Well, so with text to SQL, right, and with Genie, you can just ask a question. You don't need to drag and drop and to build a
yeah,
dashboard because you can just ask for it what you want. And where I'm excited to see that interface exposed through the messaging platforms like a Slack or a Microsoft Teams. So really, anybody who has access to those platforms, which is everybody in the company,
yeah,
can now run analytics. I think that's really powerful when you basically, today I'm very proud that we have an Excel interface that lets anybody who is an Excel jockey be able to do analytics on the Databricks Lakehouse. Just imagine we can take that and take it a big step forward to say you don't even have to understand or have Excel. You can just ask questions through Slack or through Microsoft
yeah. I mean,
Teams.
and it's I mean, it's so interesting that if you think about it, just a few years ago, like all the kind of value was on, hey, do you have folks in your team who know how to write SQL queries to be able to answer my question? And now it feels like it's like shifting into more value discussion where, the key part will be, do you have folks who can explain what you have in your, business metrics and how you
Mhm.
map that to your actual data? And that's it. And then you can just have everybody using it. It's like it's an interesting switch.
So, Quentin, with SML is for the first time we have the ability to have a semantic model in code, which means that since it is just code, it's just YAML code. We
Yeah.
can now extend our data pipeline work. We can extend our
Yeah.
ETL to actually create the semantic objects through code. So I envision a day where you don't need the human, or maybe you can use the human for that last mile of assembling the building blocks, but the ETL pipeline spits out the semantic objects that allows that business analyst just to do that final sort of composition
Yeah.
of their semantic model without having to understand where those objects came from or how they were defined.
Man, that's so interesting. So I feel like, to be honest, I used to think that semantic layer was kind of, a little bit bullshit a few years ago. I was like, oh, no, what is that again? But now I'm like, okay, makes sense. Like with the new LLM stuff really makes sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know how you can do it without that translation. I mean, you can do it and you can do it once and maybe you'll get lucky and get it right.
Yeah.
But we've done some research. So is Juan Cicada from Data.World. All it takes is four or more tables to join and things go you get 0% accuracy. So it's someday AI and ML alone will hopefully solve this problem, but for now, having that human touch to sort of give the LLM not just hints to be able to allow it to do its work is really critical, I think.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. And I see it in all the, like in Genie on Databricks, but honestly anywhere. If you start asking basic question like, hey, do the average on a given field, yeah, sure, it's gonna work. But as soon as you go and say, hey, get me insight of, the churn, like how do you know the churn? There is no way you can know that. So you always have to add extra layer.
Yeah, and the the one thing I think that back to like the semantic engine for a second. So what happens with the semantic layer is that you have the logical query comes in, and the LLM and Genie can do that, right? It can generate that logical query that says, show me customer churn, by by gender, by location, this year versus last year. So that's now a query that is one metric and like four different dimensions. Now, what the semantic engine will do is it will take that, and you have your semantic model. It's not just built on customer. Your semantic model's also got product as a entity. It has obviously time as an entity. It has orders as an entity, and so on and so forth, right? And so what we do, at least in our semantic engine, is we build a graph. And so that graph, based on all the where the nodes in that graph are all the different combinations of that dimensionality, along with all the metrics. And so when somebody asks that question, we don't produce a query that joins in, for example, orders and and product, because you didn't ask for that. You just said, "What's my customer churn this year versus last year?" By gender. So we don't have to join in product. So what our optimizer will do is it will prune away all the unnecessary nodes, and it will create the correct query that only references the tables to calculate churn, customer churn, and the customer entity along with time, because you asked this year versus last year. So that's how we're able to actually compute that query that becomes a Databricks SQL query, and that path is going to be the same every time.
So do you see like what's going to be the next step? Because you have the semantic layer, and then it feels like so you have. So I understand you have your engine computing all the like kind of analyzing and creating the queries, knowing which table to query. But if you think about a world where everything is going to be LLM based, are we like it's like you have an extra step to go from the layer that you have in YAML into some instruction to send to the LLM to actually do the magic? Do you think that's going to be at some point also some kind of open source spec that everybody use and train and benchmark using the same kind of data sets? Is it crazy?
Look, I think that it's that there needs to be at least for the time being, until we can calculate the customer churn through AI and ML,
I
and
get
do that
excited.
reliably, we're going to still need that translation layer. And so, what we're really focused on, and I'm really focused on building that semantic layer as
Yeah.
much using AI. So, can I show you something real quick? Let me
Yeah,
show
yeah.
you one other thing.
Please.
So, this is the future. We call it one-click modeling. Okay, so what you see here is that you see an existing model called internet sales, and it's a pretty complicated model. It looks simple, but if I look at this customer dimension here and I just double click on it, you can see that my customer dimension is actually itself a model that's made up of three entities: another table in Databricks, as well as two other dimensions. If I drill through now, you see the breadcrumbs. Now I'm on the geography dimension, and the geography dimension has two different hierarchies rolling up: city, state, country, zip, and zip code and country. So two different ways of rolling it up. And you can see that that model is basically built on these building blocks. So the customer dimension is made up of a geography dimension and a gender dimension. The internet sales model is made up the customer dimension, which pulls all that in. So now that we have a library, and this is all just in a repository, so this is all just in GitHub, and I'm working
Mhm.
directly off GitHub in my case. So now what I can do is I can go in and go into my Databricks data source here. So I'm going into my data sources, and I'm going into my lakehouse. And so now we have these semantic objects already defined. This is this Unity catalog here. And I can go and I can say, you know what, let's go and let's look at and build a new model off of this new internet sales data. And I can do that with one single click just by saying
Oh
generate
wow.
new model. So what it
Mm.
does, right, is it actually builds all that model out, and there it goes. It did it all behind the scenes. And now if I go and I look at this my new model YAML definition, I have my new model that's been completely defined using AI. So that's really the key here, is that once you have a library, Quentin, of existing semantic objects which have relationships, and those relationships and to other entities or table tables, we can then use AI to automatically build new semantic models and do that consistently, reusing all the semantic objects that already have been defined and are included in your GitHub repository. So that's our focus, is like to make semantic models build themselves. Let the user, that semantic modeler, give them as many tools using AI and ML as possible so that they still, at the end of the day, need to approve it. But let's let the machine do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, no, I love it. All right. So let's well, I feel like we should do a recap, like of what people can get where. So you have the open source project, which is the spec of the semantic layer. Can we say that?
It's the spec as well as pre-built models based on SML. So you can look at the spec, but more importantly, you can go and load those pre-built models, and you can load them into the free community developer
Yeah.
edition of the AtScale semantic layer platform and do what I just did yourself end to end. You can then connect it up to your BI tools like Excel and Power BI and Tableau and query it. And you can see just how it works. You can see an inbound logical query, and you can see the outbound query going to Databricks, your Databricks Lakehouse cluster, and you can see it all working end to end. So it's you can hook it up to a Jupyter notebook and use our Python interface. You can use our MDX interface with Excel. You can use our DAX interface with Power BI. You can use our SQL
You
interface
guys do
with
everything.
Tableau or any other tool. So all those endpoints are available to you. So you can pretty much do anything you want and build applications around your semantic layer.
All right. Samuel, do you have one last, I don't know, one last comments, one last thing you want to say before we close it?
So I guess the only thing I'll say, in addition to what was already said, is that when we started the company 11 years ago, really the sort of primary use case for a semantic layer was data democratization. It was basically allowing people to get easier access to business friendly data rather than requiring them to be a database
Yeah.
developer. I think now, with the advent of ChatGPT and now LLMs, I think the real use case going forward in the future is not just democratization and making access to data easier. It's actually changing the paradigm of how you do analytics to allow you to do text to SQL using an LLM, but using the semantic layer to bring business context for your business to allow it to work with this really super powerful new technology. So I think that that's the killer use case for a semantic layer is you're investing in semantic models. Those semantic models will pay dividends whenever you're doing AI and machine learning, not just in consuming it with BI tools, but actually using Gen AI to do and build real machine learning models that work with your business.
Yeah, like I 100% agree. And I think it's kind of underrated. I like people underestimate how key having all the semantic layer being properly done really is the secret magic to make all the end use cases work, like all the LLM, all the AI, and all the text to SQL stuff.
And stay tuned because you'll be able to see that integration right through your Databricks console. You'll be able to actually run queries against the at-scale semantic layer right through Genie. So be on the lookout for that.
All right, exciting. Well, thank you so much, Dave. It was amazing to have you, and I hope we will host you again soon so that you can share all the updates and all the integration you have.
Thanks, Quentin. And thanks, everybody, for listening.